I could do that. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's only 1 past 10. We're going to give it a couple more minutes. And again, you can't see it on your screen yet, but you've joined the Transformative Climate Communities Round 5 pre-application workshop for tribal communities. Hello, everyone who has just joined. We're going to give it a couple more minutes before starting. We're just having more folks trickle in. This is the Transformative Climate Communities Round 5 pre-application workshop for tribal communities. So if that's what you were looking for, you're in the right place. We'll get started soon. Giving it just one more minute and we'll start momentarily. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get us kicked off. Thank you, everyone, for joining on this beautiful Wednesday morning. My name is Kayla McDonald-Encina. I work with a nonprofit called CivicWell. We are one of the TA providers. I'm just kicking this off, but I'm going to hand it over in just a moment. Again, this is the Transformative Climate Communities Round 5 pre-application workshop for tribal communities. How about we go ahead and advance the next slide? So just a couple of housekeeping notes here. This presentation is being recorded for educational purposes. I believe there's closed captioning enabled as well for those of you who choose that. Audio, please be muted throughout the presentation. there might be instances where we might see your chat and ask for you to unmute. At that point, please unmute and talk. Otherwise, please stay muted as we work our way through the presentation. We definitely welcome questions and comments. So please use the chat box feature. That's what we're using most often, or raise your hand if you do have a question and we could call on you. The use of the camera is optional but encouraged when speaking. A lot of people on the call today are technical assistance providers, and we would get to know you throughout your application development process. So we'd like to see your faces. If not, that's perfectly fine. Again, the recording, handouts, and workshop resources will be available after the session. By the end of the week, we plan on sending a resource guide for tribal communities applying to the program and all 3 grant opportunities. So look out for all of that, including the webinar recording after this. Any technical difficulties you have, you're welcome to reach out to that email there. I think you are also welcome to just chat us if you're having any issues, and we could resolve that as well. And do expect a follow-up email with intake survey and additional next steps. Next slide. So we have a lot to go over today. We're trying to get that done in about an hour and a half, all of these things, and leave about 30 minutes for us to do breakout rooms where you'll be able to speak with technical assistance providers and SGC staff for any questions you have related to the grant opportunity that you're looking to pursue. But overall, here's what we're talking about. We're going to give an overview of the TCC program. We're going to also spotlight one of the tribal communities who received a planning grant in round 4 and hear from them. Then we're going to go over the framework of the program, developing an application and the timeline to develop the application. We have a mapping tutorial that would help you be able to create your project area and look at the project area essentially that you're trying to impact through your application components. And then we'll talk about technical assistance and do breakout groups and Q&A. Learning objectives here. Well, of course, we're going to be talking about primarily the planning and implementation grant opportunities. And that, of course, includes their components and processes. And we will be briefly talking as well about the 3rd opportunity in some cases. We will want to obviously, like I said, do a tribal spotlight, learn about their application and their experience with the TCC application process, learn how to use Google My Maps, which is that mapping tutorial that we talked about earlier, and then talk about your potential application with SGC and the TA providers. So we're just going to do quick welcome and introductions, and I'll hand it over to Anna.
Thank you, Kayla. So before we dive into the application content of the presentation, again, we will start with some welcome and introductions. So we would like to ask attendees to please introduce yourselves in the chat. Feel free to state your name and your organization. And if we can go to the next slide. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Ana Cuevas Flores, and I am an associate with Estelano Advisors. So just to give you a sense of our role on the team, Estelano Advisors is the lead coordinator of the TCC Technical Assistance Team. And our firm has provided technical assistance for the TCC program since round 1. So we are excited to continue through round 5. But as you can see on this chart, we do not do this alone. We have a broader set of technical assistance providers. Collectively, we are a third party team of consultants, organizations, and firms that provide technical assistance to the TCC program. The technical assistance team includes, again, Estelano Advisors, Arup, and CivicBomb as lead TA providers. And on the broader technical assistance team, we have a group of more specialized technical assistance providers, including Enterprise, who's the urban housing advisor, CDRG for GHG quantification, We have California Coalition for Rural Housing, focused on rural housing advising. We also have the National Indian Justice Center. At the Tribal Advisor, we have California Relief with specialization in urban greening and forestry. And then we have Parallel Strategies with focus on climate. So today you'll get to hear from Estelana Advisors and CivicWell, as Kayla introduced herself. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Riley from also Estelana Advisors to introduce himself.
Yes, thank you, Anna and Kayla, and good morning, everyone. My name is Riley O'Brien. I'm a senior analyst with Estelana Advisors and the project manager for the technical assistance team for TCC, and really excited to hear from you all today. So with that, I will pass it to Josh from CivicWell.
Good morning, everyone. This is Josh with CivicWell. Excited to be participating today and listening in and joining in on some of the breakouts and answering any questions you may have.
And again, you've already met me, Kayla McDonald and Sina with CivicWell. Josh, myself, and the NIJC team will be the primary, I would say, technical assistance providers for tribal communities, and EA maybe as well. I did want to share some news because I know some of you have worked with us in the past, NIJC and CivicWell in particular, to develop your applications. You might be doing so this round 5 as well. You're not seeing NIJC on this leading this presentation today because they're taking some time to actually mourn the passing of Raquel Kelly Myers, who some of you have definitely met, and who was a part of the NIJC team. She's actually she was the executive director. So they're going to be taking some family time before round 5 really gears up, and just wanted to send that out there. I'm very sorry to share such extremely sad news, but I felt like it needed to be said with the fact that they're absent today. So our thoughts go out to them, and we look forward to working with them in the future, and fine to proceed on to our next slide. And actually, I was speaking for this slide, so we can move on to the next one. And then I'll give it over to Anna.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your introductions, and Kayla for that unfortunate update. So with that, I know we have some SGC staff on the call, so I wanted to hand it over to them to briefly introduce themselves and give a brief overview of the California Strategic Growth Council.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jess. I'm a program associate for TCC. I help primarily with outreach, communications, technical assistance, and some grant management. And my colleague Jerry is also on the call, so I'll pass it to him.
Good morning, everybody. Jerry Rivero here with the Strategic Growth Council, Senior Program Analyst. I'm happy to be on this call. And yeah, a little bit about Strategic Growth Council. So the Transformative Climate Communities is a program that falls underneath the California Strategic Growth Council. Really, the vision of the program has been for the Strategic Growth Council has been healthy, thriving, and resilient communities for all. And then as far as transformative climate communities goes, really the work being community-led, community-driven, with community outcomes all around climate impacts to the most disadvantaged communities across the state. So we're here to have these conversations with y'all, and yeah, looking forward to any questions at the end. We'll be around for questions.
Great, thank you both. And again, feel free to continue introducing yourselves in the chat. We'd like to get to know each other. And with that, we can go ahead to the next slide. So since the inception of the TCC program, there have been 4 rounds of planning grants awarded all throughout the state. And you can see these past awards here on this map. In this recent round 4, there were a total of 7 applicants awarded grants, but the number of awardees varies depending on funding available as seen throughout the rounds. I also want to note that round 4 planning grant awardees include more counties and expand the program into tribal communities, unincorporated communities, and more of Northern California. So just to note some specific tribal applicant awardees for round 4, these included Chicken Ranch Rancheria, the Wyatt Tribe, Hoopa Valley Tribe, and Karuk Tribe. So next slide. So like the planning grants, there have also been 4 rounds of implementation grants, again, awarded throughout the state. Given the size of the implementation grant awards, we see a smaller number of awardees. I do want to note that in these past rounds, there have not been any tribal or unincorporated grantees yet, but we hope that changes with this next upcoming round, as the program has been expanding more into tribal and unincorporated communities. Next slide. So that leads into round 5, and I do want to start with the little caveat and note that, again, the final guidelines have not been released for round 5, and thus the presentation we're going to present here has not been completely finalized, nor confirmed yet. So this slide and the next will present estimates for round 5. So historically, the TCC program has provided 2 grant types, and these include the planning grant and implementation grant. So for the planning grant, there is up to $300,000 awarded per grant. These grants are community-led and self-determined, that includes self-determined projects. And these proposals for the planning grants include planning activities that prepare communities for future funding opportunities, such as the implementation grant. And the grant term for planning grants is up to 2 years. So the implementation grant is a bigger grant, and this grant goes up to $35 million per grant. Proposals for these grants include neighborhood level proposals that include multiple integrated and coordinated projects, and the grant term for this is up to 5 years. Next slide. So the round 5 draft guidelines present a new grant type known as the project development grant. So this grant is up to $7 million per grant. And the purpose of this grant is really to provide bridge funding to create shovel-ready projects, which will fund activities such as pre-development work for basic infrastructure activities and other previously identified projects. And so the grant term for this one is up to 2 years. The technical assistance team does not know the role that we will be playing with this grant. As such, this workshop will focus primarily on the planning and implementation grant only. For now, we encourage folks to reach out to SGC if you have any questions regarding the project development grant. And with that, I'll hand it.
Sorry, Anna, before we move on, I did want to give an update on the grant awards. So this fiscal year, we did receive a small budget reduction, and so the updated award amounts, so for the implementation, instead of 35 million, it is 29.5 million. And then for the project development grant, it's up to 5 million each, and the planning grant will stay the same at 300,000 each. Thank you.
Great, thank you for this update. Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to Kayla.
Next slide, please. So we do have one planning grant awardee from round 4 here with us today that we're going to spotlight, and I'll just introduce her. So from the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition, Jill Sherman Warren, who is the executive director, has joined us, and she's going to be walking us through a couple slides and talking about the planning grant with the Hoopa Valley Tribe. Jill, you're welcome to unmute, and we can proceed to the next slide.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just heard from Jill that Jill's having some connectivity issues. So we may need to postpone the grantee spotlight until later in the presentation.
Yeah, we could go ahead and proceed with just the application overview and timeline on slide 16, and we can get back to this when she joins. Okay, so application overview and timeline. Next slide, please. So here's a list of eligible lead applicant types and applicant co-applicant types as well. We have a couple here that are bolded, which most likely would pertain to those here on the call with us today. Again, California Native American tribes, community-based organizations, and nonprofit organizations. Of course, there are a number of other eligible entities listed here. And a tribal government can be considered a public agency. There must be, if you see at the bottom of the photo on the left, a public agency must be a co-applicant. So either the tribe either qualifies as the public agency if the lead applicant is not a public agency, or a tribe, then a lead or a public agency would have to be a co-applicant. Next slide, please. So for planning grant applications, here are some of the components. You have your eligibility and threshold documentation, including the planning area maps, letters of support, narratives, work plan, and budget, and we'll get into more detail with some of these pieces in just a bit. Implementation application components at a high level, we have eligibility and threshold information, letters of support, and important to note here, we have narratives, work plans, and budgets for each project that's being proposed. There are also summary workbooks that summarize the project as a whole, that include the narrative, work plan, I believe, and the budget as well. And then there are transformative plans and readiness documentation. So eligibility and threshold requirements here for tribal territories. You have to have, for a continuous planning or project area, that applies to all grant types. For a planning grant, there is no maximum area, whereas with implementation grants, the area has to be no larger than 10 square miles, and that's in most cases, unless it's an incorporated area, and we're looking closely at that requirement and hoping it might be a little bit more clarified when the round 5 guidelines are finalized and the NOFA is released. At least 51% of the project or planning area must be within disadvantaged census tracts. So that includes 25% of CalEnviro screen. That could be either the 3.0 or 4.0 tool, and the top 5% pollution burden indicator if the CalEnviro screen score is unavailable, or within federally recognized tribal territory. And then the remaining 49% of the project area must either meet the criteria above or be in a low-income community as per AB 1550 guidelines. Let's see. So for unincorporated communities, you have to have a contiguous planning or project area. Again, planning grant has no maximum area, implementation grant no larger than 10 square miles. And similarly, the same criteria with a couple caveats applies for 51% and 49% of the project area. The only difference for unincorporated communities that you see here is you can have the 51% of the planning area can be an eligible location as per the TCC mapping tool, or you can submit data that shows self-identified disadvantaged community that is otherwise not shown with the other data that's allowable as per the grant guidelines. Next slide, please. So here we just have kind of, I guess technically I don't know what to call it, like a brainstorm or a thought process of how to develop your application. Here we have how to develop your application generally for planning grants. In a couple slides, you'll see the same thing for implementation grants. So we kind of thought, you'll see this especially in the resource guide that we develop, which is the first time that we've developed these resource guides that we're going to send out by the end of the week. And so this is going to be new information that you're seeing that's not in the guidelines to help you develop your application. The very beginning, really just meet with community members. You could see off to the bottom left there, community vision. Meet with potential stakeholders, develop a community vision. Second is to develop your project objectives, what you want to accomplish. You can think very broadly and cast a very wide net of all the kinds of projects and things that you want to do. Of course, your application, you might end up whittling down some of those projects and objectives and strategies that you have, but I think casting a wide net at the very beginning, seeing what sticks, seeing what makes sense for this grant application, especially for planning grant applications, because activities are so broad. It's just a capacity building grant for the most part, whereas when you get into implementation, you have to fit the kinds of projects that you want to do into very specific buckets. But planning grant lets you very broadly develop what you want to do in your community, and from there you can decide, if you want to split off a portion of your projects for an implementation grant or go after other funding opportunities to kind of meet the whole community vision that you have when you start to develop this project. And then develop a collaborative structure and partnerships, figure out what your project area is. Then you can start to hone in on some of the TCC specific elements, look at project activities, what specifically you would do and what you would apply for through a planning grant. Think about your transformative elements. Those support the project activities and are of course required by the TCC program. Then develop your policy priorities and then work through the application components, which is step 8 there. And we'll put some timelines with the resource guide out for each of these steps, but really I think getting steps 1 through even 4 or 5 done well in advance of the deadline and the technical assistance period, which is coming up, would behoove you to really get ready in a good place to apply for TCC. And here's a very broad framework of the program. Again, programmatically, the TCC program looks at projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that impact positively, of course, public health and provide environmental benefits, and then also promote economic opportunity and prosperity. So you could kind of think about that when you're developing your your vision, your first steps of your projects. And then from there, honing it down into a vision statement. How does your project want to achieve those program objectives? And then from there, and this again, you can see at the top, has mostly to do with implementation applications because they are pretty complex and you do have to kind of fit your projects into very specific pots, or what you see here on the bottom left for strategies. There are 11 strategies and there are eligible projects under each of those strategies. So this just provides some kind of a framework for you to develop, hone in on what your projects will be from that planning that you did at the onset. And here's a very, of course, similar tool is what I presented for planning grants that you can use for implementation grants. Very similar steps 1 through 3 for planning grant applicants. 4, especially because implementation grants are for implementation, they're for construction activities and for non-construction as well, but they require that you look at if you're crossing jurisdictional boundaries, that you're making sure that you have approvals and permissions in place and partnerships in place to be able to do construction and things of that nature in different jurisdictions other than what you may represent as lead applicant. And you can bring those partners in who are from different jurisdictions as co-applicants. Then developing your project strategies, again, looking at what those big buckets are, figuring out what projects are eligible under those strategies. And a caveat here, we haven't talked about technical assistance yet, but technical assistance is required for implementation grants. So we're going to help you through all this. Then, of course, talking about your transformative elements, your policy priorities, and then also evaluation, which is something that mostly happens after you've been awarded an implementation grant application. There's an evaluator, a third-party evaluator that's actually a part of, you plan a little bit of what that process might look like when you submit your transformative element work plans, but you wouldn't really do evaluation until you're implementing the grant. And then letters, work plan, and budget are part of the actual application itself. And I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Riley for this next section.
Thank you, Kayla. And I understand we have someone from the Hoopa Valley Tribe grantee team, Helen, on the line. So maybe now what we can do is go back to slide 14 and can introduce Helen. Helen, are you ready to share?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Good morning. I apologize. Jill has some technical problems with signing in. I'm going to be helping out today. My name is Helen Medina, and I'm with the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition. And we're working, as Riley was saying, with the Hoopa tribe located in Northern California. And so as you can see, our grantee spotlight is Hoopa Valley Tribe, and our applicants are ourselves, and along the side with also EFC West. So our climate adaptation planning process is led by the tribal members. Members will identify the assets and capture local knowledge, prioritize adaptation measures, and develop implementations and blueprints. So I believe we also have a geographical map there that you can see the area as well as you continue with the slide. And we, like I said, we're working with the Hoopa tribe, and our goal is our climate adaptation planning with the tribal member to engage in identifying and determine climate changes to cultural and traditional life ways such as hunting, fishing, and gathering. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen. And so if we could return back to slide 25, we can chat more about the requirements of each grant. I did want to just remind folks who are listening in and are on the line today, if you'd like to ask any questions either to Helen or to the technical assistance team or even to SGC staff, you can go ahead and start asking questions in the chat. We will have breakout rooms later in the presentation to allow for some more interactive Q&A and broader discussion. But if you do have any specific questions at this point, feel free to put them in the chat and our team can try to answer those. And with that, we can go over some of the narrative requirements of the TCC grant. Narratives are a really important part of the application, is really one of the core elements of the application itself. And for the planning grant, as some of you may know from round 4, the narratives include an overview. It's really all in one document, but there are several sections, and those sections include a description of the planning area, which will allow you to demonstrate your area's eligibility for TCC, as well as describing why your community needs TCC funding and how it may benefit from that funding. Next, for the planning grant, you would describe your proposed planning activities. As Kayla mentioned earlier, those could range from big picture community visioning, tribal member engagement, as well as more specific categories of planning activities, such as what Helen mentioned, as far as climate adaptation planning and planning around prioritizing different adaptation measures. There will be a section on organizational capacity, which will allow you to describe your applicant team, if you have any co-applicants involved, or if it's just a tribal government applying as a sort of single applicant, as well as just what the involvement would be if there are multiple applicants, what each co-applicant would be involved in. And then last but not least, the transformative elements, which Kayla alluded to earlier as well. For the planning grant, you will need to describe how your proposed planning activities will advance at least one of TCC's transformative elements. And again, it's at least one transformative element for the planning grant. Those elements we'll talk about in a moment, but before we go on to the next slide, I did want to distinguish between the narrative requirements for the planning grant, which I just described, and for the implementation grant. And basically for the implementation grant, you will need to complete these narratives, the same narratives you complete for the planning grant, as well as narratives for each project that you propose. So each project that you propose for an implementation grant will require its own narrative. It will require its own, a separate list of answers to specific questions that pertain to that project category, or as TCC calls them, strategies, are basically groupings of projects. And then for implementation grants, you will actually have to touch on all transformative elements. So for planning grants, it's at least one, but for implementation grants, you will be developing actual narratives and in fact plans for all of the transformative elements. So if we move on to the next slide, we can go into what those transformative elements are. There are three listed on this slide. Those include community engagement, workforce development, and displacement avoidance. And for the implementation grant, you will be developing a plan for each of these transformative elements. So you'll be essentially describing how your TCC implementation grant would include community engagement that is robust, that speaks to the experiences of members throughout the tribe, throughout the tribal land. And then as far as workforce development, you would be identifying what are some of the economic needs, economic opportunities, potential career pathways that these TCC funded projects could help you develop. And then with displacement avoidance, this is an area that in an urban context with previous implementation grantees was really focused on allowing residents to stay in the neighborhoods where they had grown up and allow communities to continue to afford to live in areas that may be undergoing renovations or enhancements through TCC funded projects. In a tribal context, that story may be similar. It may also involve other dynamics, including ensuring that there are, continued job opportunities, continued opportunities for, sustainable livelihoods in the community. And then if we go on to the next slide, we can see the remaining transformative elements. Climate adaptation and resilience is another element that will require its own transformative plan for the implementation grant. With that transformative element, we are generally looking at how will the community adapt to impacts of climate change? What are the potential impacts of climate change in that specific area? Of course, depending on location, that could involve things like sea level rise, wildfire risk, drought risk, extreme heat, and so on. And then these last two transformative elements, they don't require their own plans, but they do require planning efforts to essentially identify and dedicate funds to tracking indicators and tracking data, essentially making sure that that the state and the community can measure the impact of a TCC implementation grant. And then the leverage funding requirement, that is a requirement for matching funds essentially. So what are some funding sources that could help augment the TCC fund and allow for some enhancement of that, of those projects. And so if we move on to the next slide, we can see the work plan is another component of the TCC application. So this is a spreadsheet format that essentially allows you to detail what are the tasks, what are the deliverables, what are the timelines for each of your planning activities for the planning grant or for each of your projects. And so for the planning grant, there's just one summary work plan that outlines all your planning activities. For the implementation grant, you'll have a summary work plan as well as a work plan for each proposed project. And moving on to the next slide, for the budget, we have a very similar format. So moving on to the next slide, it's similarly a summary sheet for the planning grant, and then for the implementation grant, a summary budget as well as a budget for each proposed project. And then finally, we'll talk about the letter of commitment requirement. So each applicant, and for tribal applications, that could be a single applicant. But if you do have a setup similar to what Helen talked about with the Hoopa Valley tribe with co-applicants, whoever is on the applicant team must provide their own letter of commitment that is essentially committing to accepting TCC funds. And in addition to that, there is a bit of a nuanced requirement around obtaining letters of support. So essentially, ideally, there would be a formal resolution passed by the tribal council to commit to receiving TCC funds. But there is an option, because we recognize that could be very difficult depending on what your council meeting schedule is and so on. You could instead receive a letter from an individual council person that would essentially commit to those funds and commit to a formal resolution once the grant is awarded, if awarded. And then the last couple of requirements here are also very important. If you are going to expand your planning or project area beyond the tribally owned land, the tribal reservations, you will need to get a memorandum of understanding from those jurisdictions that control those other land areas. So if you are, for example, going on to non-tribal land within a particular county, you would need a memorandum of understanding from that county government. And similarly, if you do follow that approach, in addition to that MOU, you would also need a letter demonstrating that the TCC application is consistent with local plans from that jurisdiction, whether it's a city or a county, from their planning and public works department. And then last here is site control. So if there are any sites that you've identified that your tribe or your applicant team does not directly own or have jurisdiction over, you may need a letter of just site control permission from whoever owns that location. So if it's a private business, for example, where you'd like to hold community engagement meetings, or if it's a parking lot where you'd like to build solar panels, you may need a site control from the owners of those properties, site control letter. And so moving on, we will also just quickly discuss the planning activities and for the planning grant, as well as the strategies for the implementation grant. So the planning activities, just as some examples here, we've listed, ways that you could use TCC planning grant funds to build capacity and engage members of your community. So these could range from, like I mentioned earlier, kind of broad-based public outreach, as well as internal and external capacity building, updating policies, studying financial considerations, developing needs assessments, developing project site assessments. So there are a variety of activities you can fund with a planning grant. And if there's something that you'd like to fund that's not listed here, you can ask your technical assistance provider to essentially review those ideas with you, because there's a good chance with the planning grant that it could be deemed eligible. If we move on to the implementation grant strategies, this is where the project does get a little bit more, or where the program, I should say, the TCC program, it does give you a bit more specific guidance, because these are all categories of infrastructure and different types of projects that you may want to fund with TCC grants. And so these range from everything from housing to transit to energy efficiency, water efficiency, waste reduction, urban greening, green infrastructure for rural areas, for tribal areas, and a variety of other infrastructure categories. And there's a note here that at least 3 projects must be both quantifiable and ready. Those are terms developed by SGC just to describe projects that can be measured, where their greenhouse gas emission reductions can be measured. So essentially, a good example of this would be a solar panel. You can measure how much energy that's generating, and therefore can measure how much fossil fuel-based energy that's eliminating or preventing, and therefore how many emissions that is preventing. And similarly, a ready project is a pretty specific term, which really means that a project has all the legal hurdles, all of the permitting and kind of planning hurdles completed. So that's why we have it's one of the several reasons we have the planning grant, as well as this new project development grant, to help communities that have maybe not cleared those hurdles yet to do so. But if you do have at least 3 projects that are ready to build, you can quantify their emissions reductions, and our team, technical assistance team, can help with that process. If you do feel like you have at least 3 projects that are ready to go, then the implementation grant might be a good fit for you. And so with that, I will pass it to my colleague Anna to talk a bit about how these applications are reviewed and scored.
Thanks, Riley, for an overview of those components. So I'll be going over the scoring criteria. And again, just want to note that these are estimates based on round 4 guidelines and the round 5 draft guidelines. We encourage folks to check on the round 5 guidelines once those are finalized for final scoring points. But I'll be reviewing again primarily for the planning grant and implementation grant, but I do want to note also that some of these criteria also apply to the project development grant. So the first criteria is objectives and visions, which is up to 30 points for the planning grant and 45 points for the implementation grant. So basically what the section covers is, do applicants have a comprehensive description of the planning or project area? Is there a clear understanding of community needs and desired outcomes for the community you're trying to serve? And also looking at consistency with statewide planning priorities, and that it meets the TCC objectives. So the second criteria is planning activities and transformative elements. So for the planning grant, this is up to 50 points, implementation grant up to 75 points. So as Riley mentioned, planning grant applicants must describe their planning activities and identify planning activities that enhance or further your tribal community's vision and objectives, and demonstrate how these intended planning activities would achieve local and state goals. And then specifically for the planning grant, You will have to indicate how the planning activities are related to at least one of the transformative elements reviewed earlier. For the implementation grant applicants must submit documentation and plans related to all of the 6 transformative elements. Again, these included community engagement, displacement avoidance, workforce development and economic opportunity, climate adaptation and resilience, leverage funding, and data collection and indicator tracking. So the third criteria is applicant team capacity. And this is really more on like looking at the readiness to conduct the work on time and within budget for the applicant team. And it also looks at the strengths and diversity of the partnerships. And so then the last 2 criteria are only for the implementation grant only. And these include the projects. So as Riley mentioned, you know, there are several strategies that you can choose projects from. And so for this, we look at the TCC program looks at the project design and feasibility, the readiness for project implementation. And again, if there are multiple community benefits to the project area from these projects proposed, and at least 3 of the projects must be quantifiable and ready. And so then the last criteria, again, only applicable to implementation grant applicants, is the pro-housing policy incentive. And this is, there are 2 ways to receive these points, and these are like bonus points. This is not a requirement. But one of the ways is if the project area is designated as a pro-housing jurisdiction, our points will also be awarded to project area jurisdictions that have applied for and are awaiting designation. And again, overall, the planning grant goes up to 100 points and implementation grant is up to 205 points. And with that, we can go over to the next slide. So in regards to the TCC application timeline, again, these are estimates. We encourage folks to visit the SGC TCC website to keep the most updated timeline as these dates begin to be finalized. So this workshop that we're hosting is considered part of the pre-application assistance phase, which is that first row happening through February and March. We are also providing direct application technical assistance, and we are onboarding specifically tribal and unincorporated communities. And more information will be shared on how to connect with the TA team and how to begin the onboarding process when we get to the technical assistance portion of this workshop. So the final guidelines are expected to be adopted by SGC with the application and notice of funding availability posted around late March, late February to early to mid March. And then we're looking after that, there will be a round 5 planning grant interest survey. So any applicants who will be pursuing the planning grant will have to submit an interest survey indicating that that is the grant that they will be applying for. And then for any applicants pursuing the round 5 implementation grant, there will be a pre-proposal deadline, basically a summary of your implementation grant proposal, anywhere from April to June. After that, the round 5 final application submission deadline will be anywhere from July to August, with the round 5 TCC awards adopted by the council in the fall. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Riley to go over planning project area.
Yes, thank you, Anna. And I just put something in the chat here, which is a link to our step-by-step mapping instructions. So I linked in Dropbox. I'll also put a link to Google Drive if that works better for you. But basically what this is it's a way to start your project area map. So unlike, or I should say, in addition to identifying your project area or planning area in the narrative portion, you will need to submit a map of your project or planning area. And that's something that our team can help you with, something that our technical assistance team has done many times in the past, helping applicants submit their project area maps. But this is a way that you can get started on your own and can sort of speed up that process and also make sure that the maps that we help you create match what your vision is and what you would like to see in as far as your the geographic focus of your projects or plans. So I'm going to share my screen and just take a look at what the Google My Maps tutorial essentially looks like that I just linked to. So one of the first components here is to make sure that you are logged into a Google account. So if you don't have a Google account, you can create one for free. But we certainly suggest doing that as a way to start this process. Once you've created that Google account and you're logged in to that account, you want to go to mymaps.google.com, which is also linked in that guide that I linked to. And when you click that, you will be redirected to this page, Google My Maps. And from here, you can go to this button to create a new map. And so once you create a new map, you will see a blank map, untitled, and at this point, you may want to rename this map just so you can keep track of what you are working on. So we can rename this as Round 5 TCC, and we'll just say test for now. The next step will be to really look for your community on this map. Try to find a something that could be the center of your tribal reservation. It could be a landmark that maybe you'd like to focus on preserving or planning for future enhancements through one of these strategies or planning activities that we've talked about. So for this example, we're going to use a Round 4 planning grant recipient, in this case, Chicken Ranch Rancheria. So we'll just type Chicken Ranch Rancheria into the search bar. You can see there are a couple of options that come up here, and we can click on either of them. They're both, they're essentially 2 points in the same general area. So if we click on the first one, it will drop this green dot or this green point into the map area. So let's click Add to Map. And once we do that, it will add it to our untitled layer, our first layer here. And at that point, we can rename this layer something descriptive as well. So let's rename this Round 5 TCC, and let's call it Chicken Ranch Rancheria. From here, what we've put together to help in this process of plotting out your project area or planning area, we recognize that one of the biggest challenges in identifying your planning area in several cases is to identify which jurisdictions you may need to partner with, you may need to work with on a memorandum of understanding. If you are in a federally recognized tribe and with federally recognized tribal territory, you don't need to partner with any city or county jurisdiction. But in some cases, applicants still choose to do so, perhaps to widen the impact of their work or just build that partnership for the future. So what we have done here is provided you with a link to a Dropbox folder that you can also access on Google Drive with 3 files that are called KMZ files. And so I'll pull in this folder here. you can see there's one called incorporated cities, one called tribal areas, and one called unincorporated CDPs. Those are census designated places. So what we'll go ahead and do is for each of these files, we'll download them. And then once they are downloaded here, if we go back to our map, and sorry, this is the later version, what we'll want to do with our map we were just looking at is go in and add each of these layers. So when we click the add layer button, it will add a new layer that offers this import button. And this allows you to import data from a CSV file, a spreadsheet, or a KML. A KMZ file is a type of KML file. So in this case, we'd like to import data from a KML file, specifically a KMZ file. And so we're going to click this import button here, and we can actually just drag these files from our downloads bar to this portion here. And so now this unincorporated areas layer has been added. So each of these pink dots represents a census designated place in an unincorporated area of California. So each of these pink dots are within areas that are not governed by a city government, but rather they are governed by a county government, or in some cases, a tribal government. But to actually look at which areas are, under the federal recognition of a tribal area. And again, this is just a starting point for this mapping process. So your technical assistance provider can work with you to confirm this. But we can also add a layer for those tribal lands, those tribal areas. So we can do the same thing with this tribal areas KMZ file. We'll pull it into here. And what has just loaded is a layer here with these green areas that represent some of the tribal lands in California. And so you can actually use this check mark button to show or hide the different areas. And so it's a little bit easier to see the tribal lands when the unincorporated pink dots are removed. But this is just a layer showing all of those lands across the entire state. And don't worry about the zeros. They don't mean anything. What that really means is that all of the files have been, all the areas have been combined into one file. And so the last thing that we'll do here is we'll essentially reopen or redisplay the pink dots, the unincorporated areas. We still have the green dots displayed. We're going to add one more layer just to show the incorporated cities. So we'll click import again. We'll drag the incorporated cities KMZ file in here. And sometimes it does take a couple of tries. So it might say, error when you try to add the file. I would just try again if you run into that issue. But at this point, we have now these orange dots that are displaying all of the incorporated cities, all of the city governments throughout California. And so this will be really helpful in helping you determine which areas and if or how you may need to develop memoranda of understanding with other jurisdictions if you do choose to develop a larger project area. So our next step here is to zoom back into the Chicken Ranch Rancheria that we're using as an example. And to do that, it's pretty simple. You can just bring this dot open here, and we'll want to just zoom in. So we can click this plus button here to zoom into that area. And as long as we have this hand tool open, we can also drag through the map And we can once again zoom in. And so at this point, we can exit out of here. You can see that there is a tribal land associated with the Chicken Ranch Rancheria here in green. But there are also a couple of pink and orange dots nearby. So in the Jamestown area, there's a pink dot. In the Sonora area, there's an orange dot, which reflects the fact that there's an actual city government in Sonora. So what we're going to do before we draw a test or a sample project area, we will just practice some of the tools that you can use to add things to the map. So we've already tried the search tool to add the Chicken Ranch Rancheria place mark. We've used the import tool or the add layer and then import tool to add the unincorporated, incorporated areas and the Native American lands, the tribal lands throughout the state. What we'll do next is just drawing new markers here. So we can use this button here, add marker, to click anywhere on the map. We can click perhaps in the middle of the lake here, just as an example. Just left click once again, and you see point 2. This is a new point. So we can save this point. We can use the style button to change the color. We could change the name. So we can rename it as test, for example. There are a few other things you can do. There are features like add directions if you hypothetically wanted to find directions to different locations, but that's not necessary for the TCC program. So at this point, we'll just delete with this trash can button, delete the place, and move on to testing out some of the other features here. Next, we can draw a line. And so we can just draw a line just as an example. Let's try to connect this blue dot showing the Chicken Ranch Rancheria we added in the search bar to the pink dot in the Jamestown area. So if we basically want to click on the pink dot and then can click anywhere else, it doesn't have to be the pink dot, but if we click anywhere around here, it will create another endpoint. And then at this point, we can double click and that will create a line segment. So then at this point, we can save the line segment. Similar tools, we can change the color, change the width of the line segment. We can also look at the length of the line segment, which can be helpful. So this is 2.9 miles. But we'll go ahead and delete this once again. And I'll also note that if you want to make a larger line segment or one that has a couple of different, a different shape, you can do so like this. You can just keep adding points and you can make it really any shape that you'd like. And the way to stop the line segment, the way to save it is to double click. So when you click twice, then it will save. So we can save this again, we can delete this again, because there is one very important feature that this line tool can allow you to do, and that's create a shape. So if we create a line segment here, but we don't double click, we just click once, we can add another point over here. If we go back to our original point and double click, it will actually create a polygon. And so it creates this triangle here. And when you save it, you can not only see the perimeter, 8.66 miles, but you can also see the area. And so this will be helpful with what Kayla mentioned earlier for implementation grant applicants, where there is a project area size limitation. And so with this polygon, similar features here, we'll delete this. And then we'll just go ahead and create an example project area or planning area. And so to do so, what we're going to try to do, we're going to try to be ambitious here. And let's say that Chicken Ranch Rancheria wants to partner with the community of Jamestown in Tuolumne County and with the city of Sonora, we can actually draw a project area that encompasses all three of these jurisdictions. So let's say we want to start here, go all the way up to maybe the Sonora High School area, and wrap maybe even around East Sonora. Not go too far up into these less developed areas, but just kind of stick to this Route 49, Route 108 corridor. And then again, we go back to our original point to create a shape. So if we double click here, this will create polygon 6. Let's just call this sample. And sometimes it takes a bit of time to rename, but sample project area. If we save this, we'll see that there's a 16-mile perimeter, but more importantly, 8.84 square mile area. So that means that as long as this qualifies as a rural area based on the round 5 guidelines, that we would be within that 10 square mile limit. But again, this would be something to work with your technical assistance provider to confirm, to help you in finalizing this project area. What our team can do is take this basic file and we can download it and use other mapping software to add a legend, to add other layers and other information and customize it however you would like. But this is a way to get started on your own to, kind of brainstorm where you might want to focus your efforts. And the last thing I'll mention is that another thing that you can do once you have a project area, you can try out ways to, identify key points. So maybe maybe you want to host a community workshop, or maybe you want to build some sort of new community facility at this Railtown 1897 State Historic Park. We can add a point there. We can say, community facility. And so with that, you can kind of play around with this on your own. We can talk more about this during the breakout sessions, but I hope this has been helpful as a way to introduce you to Google My Maps and introduce you to some of the ways that it can help with your TCC application. And so with that, I will pass it back over to CivicWell. Deanna can share your screen again, and we will continue with our presentation.
Thank you. So we're in the very last part of our presentation. Thank you for being with us, and hopefully you've learned a lot. We could actually, all right, so I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of the technical assistance process, and of course, give you a reminder here about the application timeline. And then shortly, we're going to break out into breakout groups where we could hopefully answer a lot of your burning questions. So again, now February through March, direct application technical assistance onboarding. We've reached out to tribal communities that have submitted inquiries and are interested in getting just initial assistance. It's not the deep technical assistance, but that's wrapping up pretty soon because we're about to start a technical assistance period. But first, pretty soon, SGC will finalize the guidelines. And in March, there will be the notice of funding availability that's released. And that's pretty much the kickoff for kind of our more robust technical assistance support through when the applications are due, which is, it looks like hopefully that'll be determined with the revised guidelines that come out in the next month or two. But July through August is when we're looking at when planning grant, project development, and implementation grant applications would all be due. And you can also see in here, April through June, there are some interest surveys and for a planning grant applicants, and then a implementation grant pre-proposals are due. These are definitely important milestones, and we'll have plenty of communication indicating when, what's required in order to submit these and when they're due. Those are important deadlines in order to be considered to continue on with technical assistance through the application deadline. And then later this year, the Strategic Growth Council will adopt round 5 award recommendations. Next slide. Here's just very broad overview of what technical assistance looks like and how the technical assistance team could support you. Again, that includes the people, technical assistance providers includes those who have all been speaking today during this presentation. And then there are others who might be able to provide more guided assistance that we, if needed, we will put you in contact with those other people. They are usually, again, Enterprise Community Partners is a affordable housing expert. So if you have certain projects and certain needs, then we'll get you in contact with the rest of our technical assistance provider team. And for all grant types, we're going to really help you understand the grant guidelines, help you work through what your planning or your project area should look like, aligning your projects and your vision and objective for your proposal, and help you with a number of other things here that are listed. And one other caveat I will say is, again, I've mentioned before that for implementation grants, everyone who applies, no matter the jurisdiction or the applicant type, you're required to go through technical assistance or to work with the technical assistance provider. But for planning grant applicants, only unincorporated communities and tribes are eligible for technical assistance, whereas incorporated communities are not. Next slide. So here we have some links. Again, when we do share these slides, you'll be able to tap on these links. You, if you've signed up for updates through SGC or for the TCC program, you've hopefully been receiving emails. If you should be receiving links like these to apply for technical assistance. And we also have, and I'm very sorry, we didn't update one of these emails here, but later on we have updated emails. So disregard the CCRH email, that's incorrect. In a later slide, like I said, we'll have the correct emails that you can reach out to for our team. Here it is. Again, as I mentioned at the very bottom, National Indian Justice Center is taking a brief leave of absence for the time being. So we would instead point you to contact either Riley at that email address or myself. In the meantime, if you have any questions, anytime. And I don't mind leaving this up for just a moment in case anyone wanted to write these down. I will also put them in the chat, or perhaps Riley could put them in the chat. Thank you, Riley, for adding the TA survey in the chat. Next slide. So now, hopefully is a great time. We can all have a robust discussion, answer a lot of your questions with this last segment. Before I break out, I'll give it over to others for my team in case there's something you want to mention, but I'll just say in a moment, there should be a button on the bottom of your screen. It looks like, at least in my view, when you see the 3 dots on the bottom, you click on those and there's a breakout room option there. What you can decide to go, well, stay in this main room if you want. If you have just very generic questions, but if you go into group or breakout room 1, we will talk about the project development grants, planning grants, and if you're just undecided, you haven't figured out which grant opportunity you want to go after. And then the second room will be for implementation grants. So before we break out, is there anything else anyone would like to bring up? TCC team, anything else?
Nothing
Okay,
from our end.
hearing.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
thank you. All right, if you all want to break out into any of the groups or any of the breakout rooms that you want to join, feel free to do so now. And actually, one caveat to the breakout rooms, I think what we've decided instead is the main room would just be if you have technical difficulties. But perhaps if you just have general questions or if you're undecided, go ahead and join room 1 instead.